So a big welcome to everyone online and everyone who's here in person. For those of you online, we have a fairly full Buddha hall and we expect it to become even more full in the coming days. My name is Thubten Chodron. I'm one of the monastics here at the community in Sravasti Abbey, which is a Buddhist monastery in Newport, Washington. We are hosting this event in collaboration with 84,000, translating the words of the Buddha. This event is titled, In the Presence of the Tathagata, a monastic resounding of the transcendent state of wisdom in 8,000 lines. But we have with us not just Abbey monastics, but also a number of guest monastics and many lay friends. All of us together have this opportunity to participate in the resounding. That will be over the next 4 days, over 12 sessions. So we invite everyone who's with us now to participate as you're able over those days. And this whole event has been in progress for about 3 years as a collaboration between Sravasti Abbey and 84,000. So from the Abbey side, this is incredibly important as this event is part of our consecration of the new Buddha Hall, that these profound words, barely heard in English before, will be filling the space and imbuing our walls with ethics, wisdom, compassion, and hopefully creating the causes for us to all progress quickly on the path. From the side of 84,000, they have supported, sponsored the translation of this text. They have hosted many resoundings, and they are providing this amazing text to the world. So what is a resounding? 84,000 uses this term for these types of events, which are similar to a Tibetan monastic tradition of reading aloud the whole Buddhist canon or a part of it. For those of you who are here in person, we have the canon on each side, the words of the Buddha, the Kangyur and the Tengyur, the commentaries. And by setting a good motivation and reading this aloud, we're able to really benefit all sentient beings. So while we can't recite the entire Kangyur together because it's not yet available in English, 84,000 is working on it. So that is amazing. We really graciously thank everyone at 84,000 who has been contributing to this task over the past 15 years. They have already freely published online about 50% of the Kangyur, which is the words of the Buddha, and much more is on the way. So with us here today, we have Venerable Kunjuk Norbu, who's copy editor at 84,000, whose visit to the Abbey 3 years ago started this process. He will be leading us through the resounding over the next 4 days, and we are greatly appreciative of his effort to bring this event here and planning for it, including reciting the whole thing aloud by himself 4 times to make sure the timing works out. So we can't say that this is the very first time that the text has been read aloud in English. It's the 5th time. And we also have with us Dr. Nathaniel Rich, who is a research editor and member of the translation team at 84,000, and he will speak with us a bit in the 2nd session tomorrow. And we have Ken Ying here, who is the Director of Strategic Branding and Communications at 84,000. And very importantly, we have Professor Gregory Seton, who is with us, who is the translator of the transcendent state of wisdom in 8,000 lines. And he will be speaking with us later tonight about the text and his translation process. But first, we will welcome Venerable Thubten Chodron, who is founder and abbess here at Sravasti Abbey. And for any of you who don't know her, she is a well-loved teacher and author of dozens of books, including the 10-volume Library of Wisdom and Compassion series, co-authored with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. She founded the Abbey in 2003, and due to her vision and the support of many thousands of people all over the world, we now have 22 monastics here and are in this incredible Buddha Hall. So Venerable Chodron, thank you very much for speaking to us tonight.
Okay, so welcome everybody. If you're thinking that you're going to hear some kind of talk filled with lots of wisdom, at least for me, you're not getting that. They assigned me to give a talk. I felt like I was back at school. There was no choice. It was an assignment due at 6 o'clock on May, whatever it is today. So I'm totally unprepared because it just, the text is going to speak for itself. I was initially thinking, oh, maybe I should give an overview of the text, but I think that somebody else is going to do that. And I said to Venerable Kunshok a couple of days ago that I couldn't give an overview because I haven't read the text. And he looked shocked, and that I haven't read it, I mean, I've studied parts of the Ornament for Clear Realization. I've studied parts of Nagarjuna's Karikas. I know something about the text, but I haven't read it because there hasn't been a good readable translation. So now that there is one, I think that's the guy who did it. So thank you very much. I was just saying I've never read the text because there hasn't been a readable translation. I looked at at Kahn's translation years ago. I looked at it this way, looked at it this way. I didn't understand anything. So I'm very glad to be reading something now. I don't know how much I will understand it. I think, you really need to sit down and study this text, not only with the commentaries, but with a teacher who knows it very well. But what I do remember is being in Dharamsala on several different occasions when they were doing the resounding of the Kangyur. And everybody, it's totally packed, monks, nuns, lay people, everybody squished in. And there's one, I think there was one monk kind of assigned to each row of people, yeah? And his job was to hand out the pages because it was the usual Tibetan text like this. It's not stapled, there's no, book binding. So he would give some pages, this person, this person, this person, this person. And somehow he would, dish them out and collect them at the end and be able to put them back in the same order, because you had multiple people doing this for multiple texts, with many pieces of paper. And at first, when, I asked what was going on, and they said reading the Kangyur, I thought, well, why? I mean, if you're going to read the Kangyur, shouldn't you take it step by step and text and do it beginning to end, instead of everybody reciting a few pages here and there and not knowing where you are in the text? And then I began to understand that it's the hearing of the text in this situation that's important. The idea being that when you hear the Dharma, even you don't understand much, or even anything, it plants seeds in the mind stream, and those seeds will ripen at some other time, because they're virtuous seeds by the power of the object of it being the Buddhist speech. And so it will ripen at some other time, and then we will be able to understand it. So I thought, okay, that's good. You know, I didn't stay to listen to the whole conjure and with everybody talking all at once. I mean, it was hundreds of people talking all at once, okay? But what we're doing here is a similar thing. And when they first said it was a resounding, I had never heard that word. Had you heard that word, any of you? A resounding. And so I've thought of it, you know, over time. Resounding, okay? The sounding is clearly of the text, you know, what the Buddha said that Ānanda was put in charge of. And I imagine, you know, when it says, thus I have heard, it's Ānanda who's going to be telling everything. Is that right? Yeah. So resounding. So there was Ānanda giving, you know, telling what he had heard. And of course, it's the Buddha and Subhiti and Shariputra and lots of people talking in it. And we are saying that again. We're, you know, the Buddha lived and then passed away, but we're saying it again. We are resounding, putting that sound into the environment, yeah, into the universe. Yeah. And I think that doing that, especially here in the United States at this time in history, is quite potent, you know, as we all know. How to say this politely? The country under its present leadership has not really acted as something that exudes wisdom and compassion. Did I say it okay? So by resounding, reciting, putting this energy of the Buddha, you know, who in this text taught all the bodhisattva stages and, you know, the stages of the hearers, the stages of the solitary realizers. He laid out all the main practices, you know, that people had to do in any of the three vehicles in the Prajnaparamita sutras. And we're putting that out there, yeah, in this, may I say, by Buddhist definition, barbaric country. Yeah. And so this is something that is quite important. And since people are talking about patriotism now, I think that saying this text and putting that wisdom and compassion in the air to spread everywhere is a very patriotic deed, because I think it's in tune with what the founders of this country said, although they didn't actually live it, about everybody being created equal and what was it, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you know. But this is what the Buddha wanted, yeah. And life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, okay, happiness, full Buddhahood, yeah, liberty, the freedom you attain as you gain the realizations of the path and the true cessations on the path. And the life that we're all aspiring for as fully awakened Buddhas, okay? So I think that makes it quite auspicious. And we're in this little corner of Washington state, you know, which the state is liberal. This county is about as red as you can get, yeah. And here we are with the fortune to share this, and we have a good relationship with the people in the county, but to be able to share this and put this out here. Okay, so with that, I wanted to welcome you, and one more little hint, because we have sessions. I don't know if anybody is as anxious as I am about losing their voice, reciting 6 hours a day. I don't know how, well, you've done it already 4 times, my goodness. Yeah, but I'm going, how long will I get? And then my voice goes. But anyway, we will all do our best. Yeah, and we can at least whisper if our voice goes and mouth the words. But I'm sure we'll have some people with nice, strong voices who can keep on. Yeah, so I guess that's it. Welcome you all. Oh, I remembered one other thing. Yeah, one thing that Zopa Rinpoche often gave us to think about in terms of thinking about emptiness. And he would say, when you're walking, ask yourself, who is walking? Or why, maybe start out with, why do I say I'm walking? And follow it with, who is walking? Because why do I say I'm walking? The body is walking. Yeah. Who is the I that is walking? Yeah. So I think that is the Tibetan koan, at least for us to think about as we go through the day. I say I'm waking up in the morning. Why do I say I am waking up? Yeah. And then who's that I that's waking up? Okay. So this is a good thing to think about, to really see that the I is something that is merely designated independence upon the body and mind. And aside from that, who is the I? Okay. And yet, the I, the self, exists. We're all sitting here. So it's not that because we can't find an I that is walking or sitting or eating or thinking or falling asleep, we can't isolate something that is the I by its own nature, by its own characteristics, or an I that is its parts. But there's people sitting here. There's many I's. Yeah, I'm talking about the big I, the one that's the center of the universe. At least each of us think our own I is the center of the universe. But that's why you're all wrong. Yeah, I am the center of the universe. And of course we all say that. But it rules our life. But who is that I that we think is so important? Now, we can't find it, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a conventionally existent person, because there are people sitting here in this room. Yeah. Okay, so with that, I will hand it over to you. Yeah. I'm just meeting Greg right now.
Oh, could you use a microphone? Because people online would love to hear you tell stories about Venerable Chodron.
Oh, oh dear.
Actually, we met about 40 years ago on the campus of Wesleyan.
Oh,
You came to visit, and
yeah.
Jan Willis was my professor at the time.
Uh-huh.
And I remember meeting you and thinking, how can she do this on her own? She just can't do this all on her own the way she seems to. I guess I was wrong.
No, this place came about due to many people. But okay, yes, I remember very clearly visiting Wesleyan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we going to do a switch of some sort before we begin?
Yes.
Or how is this going
Yes,
to work?
We're going to switch this. We could also do the Manjushri praise,
Yes,
and
we
we could
should
also
do
take refuge. And that would be good enough, huh?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want me to get down now?
No, you can stay right where you are. Would you like to introduce this homage? That's something you like very much.
Oh, okay. So, yeah. So we thought every day to start with an homage to Manjushri. The Tibetan is what? I'm forgetting it. Gangloma. That's it. So it's what the monks and nuns recite before they start debating in the evening. They zip through it, but we, Venerable Thubten, put it to a tune, and which is a very moving tune. When you chant it slowly and really think of the meaning of what you're saying, it's quite moving. So, yeah, she will lead us in doing that.
Homage to my Guru, protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text symbolic of his being all things as they are. Wisdom shines forth like the sun, unclouded by the two obscurations, who teaches the 60 ways with the loving compassion of a parent for their only child. All wanderers caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by suffering, use dragon thunder like proclamation of Dharma, rouses us from the stupor of our afflictions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma. Wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering when its sprouts appear, clearing the darkness of ignorance. Whose princely body is adorned with 112 marks of a Buddha. You completed the sages achieving the Bodhisattva who has been pure from the beginning. I bow down to you, O Manjushri. Om Rappatsani, 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 Om Rappatsani. Om Rappatsani. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, awaken my intelligence and wisdom, that I may gain insight into Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Saṅgha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Saṅgha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Saṅgha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Thank you very much, Venerable Children, unless you want to give a second talk. Do you want to give a second talk now that we've done the prayers? No? Okay. Okay, we would now like to switch and go into the second talk for the evening. And we are going to hear from the translator of the text that we will be resounding, titled The Transcendent State of Wisdom in 8,000 Lines Sutra. So we have the opportunity to hear from Professor Gregory Seton, and this is a really rare opportunity to actually get to meet, see, hear the translator of a text like this. And certainly, especially in the Tibetan tradition, translators are quite revered. So he is currently a senior lecturer in the religion department at Dartmouth College, where he has been for the past decade. He has a master's degrees from Naropa University and the University of California, Santa Barbara, and received his DPhil from Oxford University in South Asian and Tibetan Buddhist studies. In addition to his vast academic work, he has been a practitioner of Buddhism for over 30 years and founded a nonprofit organization to provide an intensive online meditation curriculum free of charge. So let's welcome Dr. Gregory Seton.
That's not how camera
This is okay, I suppose. If you had a headset, it might be a little bit easier for me because I'm going to be fiddling with This way. Is there a oh, is that the cameras over there, or are there a different camera? Okay. Am I ready? How do I look? First of all, I would like to thank Venerable Thubten Chodron and Sravasti Abbey not only for inviting me here to speak in this incredibly beautiful temple at this wonderful place, but for actually putting on this resounding. It's incredible. You say it's rare to have the translator speak when you're doing the resounding. It's impossible to find a translator who has stood there and watched his words be resounded. It's very humbling and wonderful, and they're not my words, of course. They're the words of the Buddha, but I did a lot of work trying to translate them, which is not always easy, and I should say took quite a bit of effort over many, many years to get it right, and I'm not sure it is right, but I'll talk to you a little bit about that today and what the process looked like. I was originally hoping to give you some kind of a very clear, polished lecture about what this text is about and how to approach it. And unfortunately, I got sick. I was not able to really work on that. And I thought, you know what? We should, instead of having a polished lecture, we should just kind of talk a little bit more off the cuff about the way that I've experienced this process. As a scholar, I studied both Tibetan and Sanskrit, and I found the Sanskrit language to be an incredibly powerful and interesting language. The way it's constructed is very difficult to describe to other people, but it's a language that you can really see through to the bottom in every word and everything that you see on the page. It's so deep. The language itself is so rich, and it has so many connections. It makes the challenge of translating extremely difficult. There's just so much there. Imagine translating jokes into another language. It doesn't really play all the time, right? So in the translation of this text here, I felt incredibly difficult burden because there are jokes throughout this scripture, if you will. There's plays on words left and right, and almost everything that you would imagine would be difficult for a translator was in this scripture, as far as I could be, as far as I'm concerned. But I'd like to just talk first a little bit about the two traditional approaches to the scripture, and you've already mentioned them both in your talk. And that is the approach of reciting and approaching the text with devotion and faith. And the scripture itself talks quite a bit about this. It says that you can just venerate the text, listen to it, read it, and recite it, and wonderful benefits will come. The second approach is more for the reason-oriented types, it says, and they can study the esoteric reasoning behind the text through the outline called the Abhisamayalankara, also known as the ornament of clear realization. And this is a very long commentarial tradition on the meaning of the text, and it's extremely profound and wonderful to read. It has 1,200 subpoints, 1,200 points and subpoints. And those points contain long lists of other things. And you would be shocked to see what's in this as a starting point to understand this text. If I have to memorize all of that and know all of that and then read the text, how am I ever going to get to the meaning? So I myself have tried a little bit here and there to understand it, and I can't claim any great understanding of the Abhisamayalankara, but having studied it, I've found it incredibly helpful and useful for understanding how to translate as well as read this text. And one of the things I wanted to say is that it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of knowledge while you're going through and reading it, even though you don't need to know. You don't need to know. Just a little bit of extra knowledge can help you understand what's going on a little bit better. So I'm going to try to provide some of that for you today. And if it goes over your head, believe me, it's not intended to be fully understood in this moment, but it might be useful for orienting. And so I'll speak first about the, I'll try to speak first, rather than summarize everything, I'll just focus on explaining the term, translated here, the transcendent state of wisdom, and then I'll try and connect it to the central message of the scripture. And this way of explaining, starting with just the term, is actually a long tradition. The Indian commentators, there are two of them. There are Haribhadra and Ratnakara are the two commentators on this scripture who wrote wonderful commentaries. And they focused quite a lot on this term and wanted to talk about it in depth. And just understanding the term, they said, was a way of understanding the entire scripture. And it is the title term. So if we open it up a little bit, perhaps that will be useful for everyone going through. You'll be saying it a lot, I promise you. Nice to know what it might mean. So I'll begin with the etymology of the term, and this is a very technical discussion, and please don't get lost in this. It's not intended to be all about Sanskrit, but there are some things, signposts that I can give you for those who know a little bit about it and are wondering and have read something somewhere else. If I'm not accurate here, then you'll walk away thinking something quite different. So I'll just be reciting some of the Sanskrit so that you understand the etymology of the term, Prajnaparamita. And that etymology comes from a tradition in Sanskrit, as I was mentioning before, where words are not seen the way we see words. So etymologies in our language, English, we'll think, oh, what is the historical derivation of that term? How did that term come from the Old French or the Old Saxon into our language? And we understand the history of that term in etymology and say, oh, it used to mean this, but now it means that. Very often Westerners would like to treat etymologies this way, but if you get into the Sanskrit tradition, the Indian tradition of discussing this sutra, you see very quickly that etymology is not about that. Etymology is a teaching device. It's a way of clarifying, and the Sanskrit language particularly lends itself to being opened up in this way. And that opening is incredible, the way it's done. A master commentator should be able to open up terms to give clarifications in deep, deep understandings of the terms. So Prajnaparamita is the term that we're going to talk about, and most people have heard this, and that term can be understood in very different ways. The word paramita is the one we'll focus on first here, paramita. And if you look at the grammarians, generally, if we take it more from a Western Western etymological perspective, that term paramita probably comes from this word parama. Parama, you might know the word parama, like paramartha, ultimate truth or absolute truth. Parama. Probably comes from parama, and that gets formed into a feminine noun. So parama is an adjective. It can mean furthest or highest or most distant. Parama goes to parami in the way that the language works, and then you add this ta at the end, which is the abstract suffix, meaning something like state, the state of. So the state that is the highest or the furthest is this first etymology of paramita, and this one is often favored by grammarians who are just talking about the history of the term. So paramita, the furthest state, the highest state. And this is how Edward Conze and others have come to this idea of perfection. Okay, perfection, using this. But when you read the commentators, the most authoritative commentator on this is Haribhadra, and he clarifies that understanding of paramita should be understood in a different way, and he does this through this, what you can call heuristic etymology, which has come to be known in the West in other forms. He clarifies that it should be param, so that's instead of parami plus ta, it's param plus ihi plus ta. And this, in Sanskrit grammar, it's not going to make a whole lot of sense to you until I tell you what it means. But in Sanskrit grammar, this is a little bit unusual, but it's part of the tradition of heuristic etymologies. And what that breaks down to is param means to the far shore. Ihi means a goer, someone who goes. Someone who goes to the far shore. And ta, once again, is this abstract suffix, the state of. So if you put it all together, it means the state of someone who goes to the far shore. And that's what the meaning of the term is. He is very familiar, Haribhadra is very familiar with Sanskrit grammar and knows about the Padamapadamihi plus ta. And in certain cases, that might be applicable and a nice way to talk about the term. But he puts tons of effort into talking about it in these terms, and we shouldn't ignore that. Okay. If you ask, to what far shore does that someone go? Well, the tradition replies, to the far shore of the ocean of cyclic existence. Okay? So this is where the idea of transcending comes. Okay? You're transcending the ocean of cyclic existence by reaching the far shore. And that's built into the tradition, that understanding, samsara as an ocean, and the far shore as some kind of respite from that ocean. And that's built into this term as well. Just a side note to say, some people have regarded this as a very fanciful etymology that Haribhadra gave for the term. And this is a kind of, I don't want to say bad Western habit of discounting people, but yeah, sort of a colonial thing. Saying it's fanciful. In fact, there is a very well-established term, paramgata, which is the same thing, and we know it from gate, parasamgate. Okay, so there's a form of that called paramgata, which does the same thing and is well-established. Okay, so what is the point of me telling you this etymology? Because we're going to be talking about the term in a deeper way, and I think it's really helpful to kind of get a fix on what it's saying. If we take this idea of going to the far shore, we can translate, you can at least begin to understand why it's translated as the transcendent state. Because it's the state of someone who goes to the far shore, or reaches the far shore. And what is it the far shore of? We said, in a sense, it's the ocean of cyclic existence. But in this case, Prajnaparamita is saying that that wisdom, it is the far shore of wisdom that accurately discerns the nature of all things. Okay. And if we expand on this terminological metaphor of the ocean, we could say that ordinary beings are suffering helplessly, drowning in the middle of an ocean. By studying, contemplating, and cultivating wisdom, the three steps in wisdom, according to the Buddha's different teachings, ordinary beings can learn to swim across that ocean to its far shore. When beings reach the other shore, they transcend the suffering of cyclic existence, and they reach that transcendent state of wisdom that belongs to the noble ones. Okay? Now, here, noble ones, if you're not familiar with the term, is a very specific term referring to people, four types of noble ones usually. Arhats, if you're familiar with the term, of course, Arhats, Pratyeka Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and Buddhas. And these noble ones, all, according to the Abhisamayalankara, all have the transcendent state of wisdom. But they have it to varying degrees, we could say. Okay, it doesn't state it this way, but that's the upshot. In the homage verse for the ornament of clear realization, it says this transcendent state of wisdom is personified as the mother of the awakened ones. Because in this definition that I gave you, that which sees emptiness, the mother of the awakened ones is transcendent state of wisdom, the seeing of emptiness. That is what gives birth to the 4 types of noble ones. So this is the praise of Prajnaparamita, is because this transcendent wisdom is what produces these people, the noble ones who have transcended samsara. It is through that they get there. Now this is a metaphorical verse, and it says that she is what brings peace. I'm going to paraphrase here rather than do the whole verse. She is what brings peace. She is what brings the peace-seeking Shravakas to the state of Arhats, state of Pratyeka Buddhas. She is also what causes the Bodhisattvas striving for Buddhahood to be able to benefit the world. Without this transcendent state of wisdom, they wouldn't be able to benefit the world. And she is what enables the Buddhas to express their absolute awareness of everything. Now, even though that might make it sound as though it's referring to a single thing, the transcendent state of wisdom that does this, that is metaphorical, and we should understand the difference between the degrees of noble ones based on the degree to which they see emptiness. So the Arhats and Pratyeka Buddhas say they can achieve peace because their transcendent state of wisdom sees, and here we put it as you put it before, well, maybe a little bit different language, sees only the emptiness of personal identity, this I who's at the center of the universe. Okay? So Arhats and Pratyeka Buddhas achieve this transcendent state by seeing through the personal identity, and this is called Pudgala Nairatmya, the emptiness of personal identity. The Bodhisattvas, for their part, they're able to benefit beings because their transcendent state of wisdom sees both the emptiness of personal identity and, to varying degrees on the different bhumis as they go, the emptiness of the identity of all things. So their transcendent state sees the twofold emptiness, as it's sometimes called, whereas the Arhats and Pratyeka Buddhas see only one half of that. But still, that one half is enough to transcend samsara. Finally, the Buddhas can express their absolute awareness of everything because the transcendent state of wisdom sees emptiness in its entirety, means that they have a complete and different type of transcendent wisdom. So each one of these possesses a state of awareness that is transcendent to a different degree, and I want to sort of get to explaining in a very precise way what this term in each case is referring to, but I will focus here for a moment on the bodhisattvas because it's a little bit easier to talk about them, and to get into the details of each one would be probably too much for this occasion. So Ratnakara Shanti says that the term transcendent state of wisdom refers to 2 types. There are 2 applications of the term. And we could say one has to do with the bodhisattva when they're in meditation, and one when they're out of meditation. So in both cases, the bodhisattva has the transcendent state of wisdom, but they're different types of transcendent wisdom. In the meditative state, a bodhisattva has what they call the lokottara jnana. Lokottara jnana means, literally, it will have to translate it the same way, means transcendent awareness or transcendent gnosis, if you prefer that term. Transcendent knowledge, another way of talking about it. Lokottara, loka means the world, and uttara means going beyond or beyond the world. So literally, the gloss of this term is lokottara jnana. That is the primary referent to which the term transcendent state of wisdom refers. In this way, lokottara jnana, which is the stated primary referent, is when the bodhisattva in their meditation sees emptiness directly without any mental constructs. And that seeing directly of emptiness without any mental constructs is this lokottara jnana, this transcendent awareness. But when they get up from that meditation and they go about trying to help beings throughout the world, they have something else that's called Shuddha Laukika Jnana. Shuddha means purified, and Laukika means worldly. It's a worldly awareness, very similar to our own awareness. But the commentators clarify that it's not our awareness. It's not this ordinary awareness that we have. It's been purified. It's been made, if you will, transcendent by the seeing of emptiness in meditation. And it extends to the period afterward. But it's not the same. They differentiate this, and they do this very specifically to say that the bodhisattva must work through the path at bringing together these two, the transcendent awareness they have in meditation and that purified worldly awareness that's out of meditation, so that those two can merge and be fully transcendent, not just the purified ordinary awareness, fully transcendent. And that happens at the point of Buddhahood when the non-dual awareness arises. Okay? So if you understand that transcendent state of wisdom refers to a transcendent awareness that also has a referent in the ordinary awareness, but only insofar as when the bodhisattva is in the world, he is able to transcend the world. He's in the world, but not of the world, in a sense. So if we want to expand our metaphor, we can put this into the swimming metaphor and say, when beings reach the other shore of the ocean and they transcend the suffering of cyclic existence, and they reach that transcendent state, the Shravakas find peace and tranquility like resting on the shore of an island. So they get to this far shore, and they climb up on that island, and that's the transcendent state. That's what they understood, and that's what they have gotten to. A place where you can rest, outside of the ocean. So for the Shravakas, the island is the transcendent state. It's kind of like the idea that when you leave existence, you're no longer reborn. You go to nirvana. This is the Shravaka idea of peace in nirvana. And that is precisely the way that the transcendent state is understood for Shravakas. But according to the scripture, this is, of course, I'm trying to extend the metaphor so we can understand, and this is the way it reads in the scripture, and it's explained in the Ornament of Clear Realization. But the noble bodhisattvas, out of their compassion, they don't want to stay on that shore and just attain nirvana for themselves. And they do not regard that as the transcendent state. So they dive back in the water like lifeguards, going out to save all sentient beings one by themselves over 3 countless eons. So what is going on here is that for the bodhisattva, the transcendent state doesn't refer just to being on this island. That's where the transcendent state involves, yes, the meditative transcendent awareness where they sort of recharge their batteries, and then they go out and save more beings, and they come back and recharge their batteries, and then go out and save more beings. So as a lifeguard sort of sitting on the shore, if you will, that's in the meditative state that we just discussed. That's the transcendent state of wisdom that they're experiencing there. But when they're going out and saving all beings, it's not just to save beings, it's also to become a Buddha. They're doing that not just for their own helping of beings and to say, I save the beings, but they want to come to the point of being a Buddha. And so they swim and they swim and they get better at swimming. And we'll jump ahead here for a moment and say, what is a Buddha in this model of transcendence? What is the Buddha's transcendent state? Because we've talked about 2 others. Well, the Buddha's transcendent state is like a glowing and wonderful being who's just totally at ease in that ocean, floating without any need to move, effortless, natural, floating. You see, that is the full manifestation of the non-dual awareness, the transcendent state of wisdom that the Buddha has. For the bodhisattva going back and forth, the ocean is not a place of suffering for himself or herself. But it is a place of suffering. Still, to some degree, it is a place of suffering. Thank you. And so there's this back and forth for the Bodhisattva, working all the way up the bhumis to the point where in the higher bhumis, they start to learn to float. And that's what the real transcendent state of a Buddha is like. Now, when you come to this point where you're learning to float, you might say, hey, when we were drowning in the ocean, why didn't you teach us how to float right away? Why did we have to go through all this swimming and get to the island and then go back and forth and go back and forth? And the answer would be very sort of funny if we could overhear the conversation. Well, it's because when you were drowning, you were too fearful and resistant to learn. Okay, so the later tradition, let's say the Buddha nature tradition or the Tathagata Garbha tradition might say, everybody has this natural capacity to float. We just don't realize it. Right? We just don't realize it. It's within us to have that same transcendence as a Buddha, but we don't realize it. This scripture is not talking about that. This scripture is saying that you have to do all these things. You have to swim, you have to go here, you have to go there, and you have to do this. But how you do that and what you do it for is so that you can develop the confidence in the water that is necessary to be able to learn to float. That's a very high accomplishment. Only if you're telling me to float, I'll be like, you go down. When you're sinking, if your body is sinking, you start moving your arms. But a bodhisattva who's so accomplished as a swimmer and a lifeguard is somebody who can learn to float quite easily because they don't have that fear. They can just relax into careless ease and discover what floating in that transcendent state is like. Okay, so when we're talking about transcendent states, the three transcendent states, the island actually functions for both Shravaka types, the Shravaka and the Pratyeka Buddhas. The other transcendence described for the Bodhisattva, they don't abide in the ocean, they don't abide in samsara, they don't abide on the island. In that way, they don't see samsara and nirvana as two. They transcend both, samsara and nirvana, not abiding, not resting, not dwelling, constantly moving through the 6 paramitas. But when we talk about the Buddha, qualitatively, that transcendent state is totally different. Totally different from the other two. Floating in the ocean. So you see, when we're talking in terms of the transcendent state of wisdom, the idea that this is one transcendent state, no, there's the seeing of emptiness is defined as the transcendent state if you're talking about what is the defining characteristic. But if you're talking about what that looks like on the path to Buddhahood, that transcendent state looks different at each different stage, and this is what the entire text of the Abhisamayalankara, the Ornament of Clear Realization, is there to explain. And it explains it a little bit like I'm saying, but not with the big metaphor. That's my own metaphor. But I've worked on this and thought about this based on my studies of the ornament so that I could explain it more simply in a term that is more visual and you can understand easily. But I want to say this because this is the study approach. The study approach is understanding something about this word. What does this word mean? And what is this title? But when you get to the scripture, you're not going to see all of these swimming metaphors. There's going to be a whole lot else that goes on. So we better get to what the scripture actually says. This is the underlying structure that helps, if you know this, to not get totally lost. I can't promise you won't get totally lost. Okay. There is in the scripture, excuse me, My voice is kind of going. There is in the scripture this comparative message. And this comparative message is, if I try to put it in a simple way, this is called the transcendent state of wisdom. That's the title. And if you will, the scripture, thank you. I don't know that that will help. And the scripture is going to be comparing these, primarily the Shravaka notion of the transcendent state of wisdom, with the Bodhisattva's notion of the transcendent state of wisdom. That's the real crux of the comparison. But that is not told in a very sort of direct manner. And I'll talk about that in a moment. It's not explicitly told to you, but it's assumed in the structure of the text itself. So let me just talk a little bit about the way the text is organized and show you how this structure works. So many scriptures begin with a disciple's question that is answered by the Buddha. But this scripture begins with Buddha making a request of Subhuti. And he says to Subhuti, please illuminate. Basically, you can see this in the sutra. I won't do the phrase exactly. Please illuminate for the bodhisattvas how they begin with this transcendent state of wisdom and then realize the transcendent state of wisdom of a Buddha. And it specifically says, and they go beyond cyclic existence, which is to say, tell us how bodhisattvas go beyond cyclic existence, get out of the ocean of samsara in this transcendent state of wisdom. And that opener then is followed by the rest of the scripture, which answers it. And basically, the rest of the scripture teaches that the way, if we boil it down, okay, this is a big boil down, but the way that bodhisattvas go about life in the transcendent state of wisdom is how they transcend it. In previous translations, you might remember Konsa being mentioned by Venerable here. Difficult to read. Konsa had translated this phrase that I translate, going about life in the transcendent state of wisdom, which is basically what a bodhisattva is recommended to do. Konsa translated this coursing in perfect wisdom. Sort of like you go like this and then you course in the perfect wisdom. And he was an excellent scholar and a pioneer, a German man with certain personality flaws that included a great deal of anti-Semitism and other strange things. And I don't want to tear down his translation and his tradition entirely, but what we know about him now sheds a lot of light on his attitudes and the way he took this. That phrase, coursing in perfect wisdom, or coursing in the perfection of wisdom, simultaneously oversimplifies the transcendent state of wisdom into just this perfection, and it mystifies the entire process simultaneously by talking about coursing in it. Now, I don't want to sort of move in the direction of conflict here, but in this wonderful occasion, but what I want you to imagine, and you're going to be saying this over and over in this sutra, is what does it mean to go about life in the transcendent state of wisdom? And how central is that? Wouldn't anybody want to know what that is? Yeah. So the difference between the transcendent state of wisdom of arhats we've already described, how does a bodhisattva do this? And that's what you're supposed to be learning from this scripture. But unfortunately, the scripture is complicated. And if you try to find a way to say anything about the scripture, your tongue falls out and bounces across the floor and disappears. So I will just say that the way that it is structured, particularly around a conversation, around a dialogue, this is not uncommon in sutras, is something very helpful for understanding what's going on, okay? So to appreciate this scripture, if you know that after Buddha asked Subhuti to illuminate how the bodhisattvas go beyond cyclic existence in the transcendent state of wisdom, that this dialogue between Subhuti and his interlocutors, his conversation partners, is very loaded. Okay, we can call it loaded or encoded. In the first chapter in particular, Subhuti has a conversation partner in Shariputra. And Subhuti, among the Buddha's disciples, is known as being the foremost among those who have become free of conflict. That's the way they describe it. Tibetan tradition interprets this to mean free of negative emotions, free of the kleshas. But the literal term is free of conflict. We could think of it as he's the most open-hearted person. And his initial conversation partner, Shariputra, is reputed to be the most intelligent arhat, okay? The most intelligent. And he's also known to be the one who created the Abhidharma tradition. Shariputra. That's who he's talking to here. So to ancient readers, it would have been very obvious that Shariputra was representing, to some extent, the Abhidharma tradition or the Shravaka path. And Subhuti is representing, in a way, the Bodhisattva path. Okay? And the conversation between them is basically Shariputra is trying to get Subhuti to nail things down in an Abhidharma kind of ontological, metaphysical way. Say, this is what it is. Let's be clear about this. Let's put this in an understandable form. What is this transcendent state of wisdom of the bodhisattvas? And how is it different from ours, so to speak? So when this dialogue is going on, they don't tell you this in the scripture. I'm telling you this now. This is a hint, okay? This is a hint that we're having a problem of communication here between them. And what happens throughout the scripture is that, is that Subhuti just avoids over and over Shariputra's attempt to pin him down. It's not like he's doing backflips. He's just coming from a different logic. He's standing in a different transcendent state of wisdom. And that he's standing in because the Buddha empowered him and various other things happened in the beginning of the sutra, which you'll read about. But he's able to stand in that state and speak from that state, and that just doesn't get tied in knots. So in a way, you can understand not just what Shariputra says as coming from the Abhidharma tradition, and not just what Subhuti says as coming from this Bodhisattva tradition, the content of what they say, but also what happens in the course of the conversation. You understand? It's performative in one sense, and we'll talk about the scripture itself. Scripture has two basic ways of communicating. One is the esoteric part of the scripture, which we talked a little bit about with the ornament of clear realization. They make that esoteric part clear, explicit, what is implicit in the scripture, which is not said at all anywhere. They make that clear. But there's this performative aspect of the scripture, which is that you're watching two transcendent states of wisdom confer, and you're seeing how they relate, okay? It helps, okay? Maybe maybe I'm overshooting with that a little bit, but I think that that's pretty close to the way at least the first chapter goes. And then there's other conversations, and they unfold, and you'll see them as they do. But if you're tuned into this fact, you'll understand many of the other things about this performativity in this scripture. So I had previously said that the word transcendent state of wisdom refers to is something possessed by the Four Noble Ones. It is also the case that that word is used throughout the scripture, not multiple times, but here and there, to refer to other things besides them. And I want to just give you a little bit of a heads up. For instance, the scripture refers to itself as the transcendent state of wisdom without telling you that it's talking about. So you make offerings to the transcendent state of wisdom. What do they mean? Offerings that are laid out here on the shrine to the book itself. This self-referential way that the scripture is talking about itself is part of the performativity of this. And performativity is a big word. It includes a lot of things, and I want all of them, so I got to keep the word. But what goes on in this scripture is they are enacting what they're saying. They are enacting what they are talking about, as I've already told you. They are enacting that. And that's one level of performativity. Another level is that when you read this scripture, and it recommends throughout, as you've already heard, maybe from other sources, it tells you what you need to do with this very scripture is you need to give offerings to it, venerate it, recite it, read it aloud, do all these things. You need to perform these things with respect to this very scripture that you are reading. That adds another level of performativity. Okay, so you need to perform those things. And as you're performing, the question is, in what state of mind are you? What state of mind did you begin in? And what state of mind will you end up in? Now, there are many, many devices in the scripture that are directly at the reader. And I can't mention them all, the rhetorical devices, but they're trying in some way to transmit this transcendent state of wisdom to the readers, even beyond your understanding. And this encoded dialogue that I described is just one of them, but as I mentioned before, there's wordplay, puns and verbal pivots on words with double meanings. It's not for comedy's sake, right? It's not for comedy, though you might find yourself smiling at times. There's a couple points where some just, all-out laughter is really welcome. But what it's aimed at is teaching us it's making us, let's say, transcend our limited understandings, and it's trying to point towards the ineffable non-duality. So humor is usually something going this direction, and then there's a pause and it derails and goes that direction. And then afterwards you realize, oh, this thing and that thing, how they fit together, and humor comes. This is seeing the non-dual. Seeing the non-dual after you get the punchline, so to speak. The non-dual is being transmitted if we look for it. So one of the other ones, I hope, by the way, you get some of these jokes. I've done my best to translate them, but I think we started there by saying it's not really that easy. And Sanskrit jokes, I don't know. There's a lot of playing on words and clever things, and, sometimes you might think, okay. But if you really listen to them, there's a kind of a lightness. There's a sort of a non-fixed quality in them that runs counter to what Shariputra wants out of words. You see? Shariputra wants out of these words something very fixed, very tight, some conceptual understanding. There's a whole section where Shariputra has kind of gotten along pretty well, and he's starting to understand. He tries to say it, but everything he says comes out wrong. And Subhuti is kind of going, and they go back and forth. And it plays like Who's On First, if you know this old comedy gag, right? Who's on first? Yes, right? Plays a bit like that. And in the text itself, they stop giving you the names of who says what. It just says aha, aha, which means He says, he says, he says, he says. Up until that point, they're constantly telling you who says what. But you can't deny that they're doing this with the explicit purpose of communicating to you this very confusing interchange between these two views. And Shariputra is getting more and more desperate to pin him down. And at the end he says, well, this is not illuminating at all. And then with a smile we can imagine Sapuji says, it's very illuminating. You see, so there's humor here, and we can't always translate all that. And if you don't study the text, and if you don't know all the things, you won't see the jokes, and you won't see the echoes and the reverberations for meanings that have come down to you in other forms. If you know the Abhidharma quite well, and you read this text, it's a lot easier. If you know Abhidharma, Shravaka view quite well, and if you have some understanding of emptiness, not that hard to understand what's going on. But most of us don't know the old Abhidharma, the particular Abhidharma that they were dealing with and the assumptions that were there. So sometimes you are not given the background to understand what is underpinning this conversation and what the confusion is. And so that's where we will get confused when we read this text. And that's what the Abhisamayalankara does. It takes these different sort of Abhidharmic points and it shows you not only what the underpinning of that section is about, supposed to be about, not always that clear, but on top of that, it shows you how the Mahayana is transcending that, going further. So it's very comparative. The entire text is comparative. Even when it's explained, it's all about the comparative. This is what the Abhidharma view is, and this is how the Mahayana goes further. In other words, transcendent state doesn't just land on that fixed state in that island. It's very active and mobile. It moves from meditation to post-meditation, back and forth, until it achieves the ultimate transcendence, that absolute transcendent state of wisdom possessed by a Buddha, which is the floating. So the conversation about how to go about life in this transcendent state includes, of course, all the practices of the Bodhisattva, the transcendent generosity, which again, this word transcendent gives us an idea of all of those. Generosity in this text is transcendent only because one sees through the identity of a giver, a gift, and a recipient. So you have to transcend any notion of identity, but go out and practice giving. So the transcendent generosity, which is informed by this transcendent state of wisdom, is a practice. That's what you're doing in the ocean as the lifeguard. You're doing all these practices in that purified worldly awareness. Purified because you're not sinking in the ocean. You're not going back into samsara. You're swimming like an expert swimmer in that ocean. And you're trying to carry out these practices, and you're doing so for the benefit of all sentient beings. But more specifically, to attain the state of a Buddha so that you can help them in the way that a Buddha can, from the non-dual awareness. Okay. I don't know how much time I've spent because I have Vermont time here. Am I going way over? Should we wrap it up quickly, or can we go a little bit further? A little bit more? How close are we?
Well, Venerable Chodron didn't speak for particularly an exorbitant amount of time, so I think we thought the event would go till 8, but also thought there might be some time for questions.
Oh, okay. So I'll speak just a little bit more, and then we can have some questions, and we'll see what comes of the back and forth. It's not easy to describe all the benefits of the performative approach. I've basically tried to give you a feel for the wonderful things in this text, and if you have this in your mind, it may help you appreciate it. But my own experience of trying to chant things recite them aloud very fast doesn't really give you time to stop and smell the daisies. And the story of the Tibetan tradition, dividing the text up into pieces and everybody resounding it, yeah, there's not a whole lot of understanding that's implied. But since you'll be going from beginning to end, I thought it would be helpful to have some idea of what's going on. There are other passages, for instance, just to give some headliners of other things to look for. There's one chapter where virtually the same exact words are repeated over, a page long is repeated over and over again, and just a word or two in the middle are changed. Try copy editing that. Try copy editing that, right? I tried, and I had all my methods, highlighting and trying to figure out. So each time it goes through this, it's building. It's building. It's not just saying the same thing. It's 1,000-fold universe, 2,000-fold, 3,000. Each time it's getting bigger. And Khonsa, when he did his translation, just eliminated the entire chapter and said one page, and then he put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all in one. Which is a shame, because the entire point, I don't know, I can't say the point, is there's more than one point, but one of the points for sure in reciting this is performative. It is what it does to you to recite this over and over. What it does to you, what it does to your conceptual mind. And also, there's two aspects of that performativity. It's not just your saying the same thing over and over, which would have one effect of sort of wearing out your conceptual mind, but it's increasing in number, and it's increasing in metaphor, and it's going up and up and up to astronomical, inconceivable levels. Understand? So it's trying to kind of actually on the spot to some extent. Now, I've been speaking about this as a wonderful piece of literature almost, and I'm not meaning to say this is not the way it actually happened. It's just brilliantly manifest in this manner, and we can appreciate it for what it is. And we can talk about it in these terms, and that can help us to read through it and have more appreciation for what we're reading through. But whatever you see, there's so many different devices in this sutra. That's just one chapter doing that. Each chapter has a different word play. If you read the introduction to the translation, there's a section where I summarize different words that are being played on. I only included the major word plays. There's smaller ones too. All the time something is going on that will move your mind outside of its usual conceptual attempt to nail things down into this space. So the performative level of this sutra is to let it wash over you, to do all of this repetition and also do it wholeheartedly with devotion, and to let that destroy, to some extent, the clinging to identity that Venerable so lovely made such lovely comments about. When you're talking about this big, big, big universe, this billion-fold universe, this trillion-fold universe, and this vast scale, it's very humbling. Suddenly this I that is the center of the universe doesn't seem so big anymore. So understand that, yes, we are doing the recitation of this sutra as a resounding or a resounding for its magical, wonderful qualities that it has. Benefits for ourselves and others in this very abstract way. But certainly this scripture was intended to be recited over and over, like maybe you could say a very long sadhana, a Tibetan sadhana, over and over, as a way of engaging directly with the transcendent state of wisdom through this performativity. In other words, it offers a profound method for meeting the mind of the Buddha. Profound method for meeting this mind of the Buddha. And if you don't ever end up studying the ornament of clear realization and learning all the inside jokes and the comparative, there is a tradition that says you can get there, you can get pretty darn close without ever even having to lift that book. Now, I'm not saying don't study, okay, because I'll get in trouble. If you can, you should study. But within the text itself, there's one thing that it says, which is a very interesting other self-referential moment in the text, where it says, Shrenika. Shrenika was a wandering ascetic. Shrenika heard just one verse of this, referring to itself. Shrenika heard one verse of this and immediately went into a very high level of samadhi and experience of emptiness. Now the commentators tell us which level of emptiness was he. It was a pretty good one. For those who really want to know, it's somewhere on the path of preliminary practice, known as the Jorlam. Sometimes people call it path of junction. I'm not sure what translations you use around here. We'll change those. But the path of preliminary practice is right before the becoming a noble one. And so they say that just from one verse, just from hearing one verse, with total devotion, Shrenika became on the level of patience, the patient acceptance, which is the kind of downhill, the sort of easy downhill. You've got a direct experience of emptiness, and it will eventually, on its own, result in what they say the path of seeing, or the moment of liberating insight at the path of seeing, where you see emptiness directly for yourself without any conceptuality. So the power of reciting this or understanding this is supposed to depend on devotion. I don't have that kind of devotion, so I had to read and study and do a lot of things, and I'm still a long way off. But many of you who are going to be reciting this, knowing of this tradition, could definitely, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised. Such devoted people. Okay, maybe you need more than one verse. But it's out there. It's out there. And then finally, I'll just mention that the final 3 chapters of this, you almost want them to be the first 3 chapters, because they tell the story of Sada Praradita, who is, I believe we translate it as ever weeping. Is it ever weeping in here? What's that? Oh, we left it in the Sanskrit. Yeah, I haven't seen the most recently copy-edited form, and there are some changes that I'm not aware of. But the ever weeping is Sada means always or ever weeping. And the story of ever weeping, if you don't know it, is an incredible story. I don't know how anybody hears that story and doesn't weep themselves. It's just like a bone crusher. You can't like walk out of there alive. Really good story of somebody giving his whole heart, his whole body to receive this text, not even to get teachings on it, just to receive the text. Very inspiring story about how to go about approaching this and the kind of devotion that this tradition is asking for. And if you know this is the background, I'm telling you ahead, because when you get there, I think there are reasons for that being at the end, the Sada Praradita. Some people think it was originally a separate thing and it was attached, a separate sutra that was attached at the end of the 8,000. And so it then became part of the 8,000. And that makes a lot of sense. It's a very different tone. It's talking very differently than the rest of the sutra. And this was a tradition where you'd combine different texts together in your sadhana, in your very specific practice. But there is another reason I think that it works well at the end. I'm telling you ahead that it's a crazy story about somebody really striving with all their heart and mind. But once you get there, if you've been reciting, I think you're open
in a way that you weren't before. Okay? So there's incredible performative devices in this sutra to work on us at multiple levels. We can't just sit here and talk about it all day because we got to get to reciting tomorrow. But I want to invite everybody to participate in this recitation with some background and some appreciation for these things, just enough to make it a little bit more interesting when you translate instead of just taking a page and reciting it. All right. Thank you very much to everybody. I also would like to thank the editor, John Canty, and Charles Hastings, who edited, and Kunchok Norbu, who did the copy editing, and an amazing job of inspiring everybody to come here. I think this is just a huge bodhisattva activity, to tell you the truth. Who would have thunk, that this could be something that did it? And then Venerable Thubten Chodron for being crazy enough to say, yes, let's do it. Okay, thank you all. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but maybe...
Venerable Chodron, do you have the first question?
Well, I have lots of questions.
Oh, okay.
I'm a little bit confused about the word state. And I'm a little bit like Shariputra. I want you to pin it down.
Okay.
Okay, because you initially said it was the wisdom, of the ultimate. So wisdom is a consciousness. Yeah. So, but then the state of a bodhisattva is, what's a state?
Yeah,
And what does that word mean as you translate it, the transcendent state of wisdom? Why not transcendent state of wisdom and compassion or whatever?
Oh, wisdom and compassion. I see. Yeah.
No, but what's this, the word state?
So this is a very interesting question, and I don't want to get super technical, but if you're talking about let's take the swimming example so that I can make it a little bit more. So if you're talking about this bodhisattva lifeguard out there, and he's talking to people, he's shaking hands, he's engaged in the world, right? He's not sitting there in some state, right? We know that. He's not in a state over there on the island. He's out there in the world, he's engaged. He's doing things. And how do you describe the way he's doing them differently than somebody who is just on the surface appearing to do them with an ordinary awareness? How would you describe that? Well, we say he's acting out of compassion. Is he feeling the kind of compassion at all times that's sort of like, oh, that's so... No, he's not feeling that, right? So when you say compassion, we know compassion takes many different forms, right? So what is he doing while he's out there? Well, he's always in the state of seeing emptiness. He's never leaving that state. He never leaves the state of seeing emptiness. He never leaves that behind. And that's what the transcendent state of wisdom is. The immanent or the non-transcendent aspect is that he's engaging the world. It's purified the way he engages the world, this purified worldly awareness. It's purified the way he engages the world because he's able at the same time as he's engaging to be in that state of seeing emptiness. And how do you describe that to somebody? That's the real difficult one, right? How do you describe that he is seeing emptiness at all times? Is he looking at some space and seeing space in the sky and that's emptiness? No, he's not. He's looking and dealing directly with people, but he's acting from the state of seeing that. And so this is why the state doesn't actually make a problem for the description. But maybe you have a different point. And then let me put another one, okay? The phrase coursing in perfect wisdom, translated differently, brings the transcendent and immanent aspects together, going about life in the transcendent state of wisdom, okay? That's the two together. So when you say, what are you going about life in? Well, you're never going to depart from the seeing of emptiness. And that's the way you do your practice. And what are you going to do while you're walking around, sitting, sleeping, talking, shopping, as Dzongzar Khyentse likes to say? What are you doing in that? Well, you're doing all these activities for the benefit of others, right? With the mindset of awakening. Oops. Interesting. Okay. Should we leave state aside? Should we leave the states and move? Let me just say before that state also refers to the different states of Shravakas, Bodhisattvas, and Buddhas. They're all in different transcendent states. To some extent, that word has to be flexible to refer to all these different levels of Bodhisattvas. And so they're all in different states. When you say a bhumi, it means that they're in a certain state before they move to the next. And so the transcendent state of wisdom isn't saying something that the teachings themselves aren't. And this is why they use the gloss. Haribhadra explains it always as tad-bhava. He says tad-bhava, it's the state of that. He also calls all of those moments where he's talking about it avastha. These are these states throughout. So he says this is the state, and it's very clear that he's talking about states. Because in order to talk about the path of the Bodhisattva and how this transcendence works, you have to see that you go through these different states. All of them can be called seeing emptiness. First, even for Shrenika, when he saw emptiness on the Prayoga Marga, the Joylam, in that moment, he's seeing emptiness, but with some conceptuality. He's in a state of emptiness. They say in the scripture, you'll read it, he went into a state of seeing emptiness. It was just an incredible state. But that was conceptual, so it manifested that way. But when you become a bodhisattva, a noble bodhisattva, then that state has this purified awareness part where you're no longer thinking, oh, this is empty, or seeing the emptiness in this sort of space-like emptiness. It's more like you see the world as magical illusions, mirages, echoes, all the various things, bubbles, all these things, right? So when you're seeing the world like that, it's almost like emptiness is baked into what you're seeing. When you say, I see a reflection, that means it's not something real. So emptiness is baked into those appearances. That's what it means to say purified ordinary awareness. He's in a state of seeing everything like mirages in the post-meditation state. Once again, it's a state. In meditative state, he sees one thing, he sees it like space. In the post-meditative state, he sees it like magical illusions. And transcendent state accurately refers to both of those states and all the ones on the path. You see? So to talk about this in a very precise way, in the Abhisamayalankara, you need to have this notion, we need to get over our problem with the word state. They use it all over the place. That's what they're talking about. This entire literature is called Sa-lam. Sa, ground. They say grounds and paths. What are the grounds? States. States of being. It's a certain stage. It's a stage. In that stage, you're in a certain kind of state. But I understand. It's a difficult word. And, you know, I don't want to be the... what's that? Yeah, salam, right? Salam. That's what the entire text is about, according to the Tibetan description of it. But that's the way they describe it. The Abhisamayalankara itself is going through all of that, organizing it and showing you each one. So I don't feel that the word state is that problematic. And, you know, if you say perfection of wisdom, right? What does perfection actually mean? It means the highest state of being, right? So perfection, if you maybe you don't have to use that ugly word state, but perfection, if you're talking about the perfection, the Buddha is in a state of perfection. It's limiting, right? The mindset of awakening you wanted to. So I think this.
What's the Tibetan word for mindset?
This is going to be very controversial, especially with Gelugpas, okay? Let me just say that not everybody agrees about the way things should be divided up. And I'm not taking a side. I'm actually trying to go from the scripture's way of using the word. But let me be clear. The word that would be sem, otherwise known as chitta, and chitta has an interesting valence in Sanskrit. Okay, chitta doesn't mean mind the way we think it means mind. And before we get to sem and what sem is referring to, and the language you prefer, I'm sure there's I've done Lorik, Darik, Dudra, all this stuff. I understand the classifications of mind and how we can break them down. Understood. I'm going to go very broad here because this is not the Abhidharma. This is not going into that level. Chitta is a word that if you're reading poetry, is a word also. Cheta is a similar word. Chitta and cheta. It can mean either heart or mind. It has this affective heart quality. So, you know, Tibetan tradition sees mind in the heart. It's playing here, so it makes kind of sense, but it's figuratively got an affective quality to it sometimes. But in the Abhidharma tradition, where that word is used most and how it's used is this chitta chaita. Chitta chaita, semtan, semjung. Primary and secondary, right? That's the way it's sometimes translated. But chaita, semjung says it it's arisen from mind, right? Mind and what is arisen from mind. But that's kind of an interesting translation already to begin with from the Tibetan tradition. Chaita can mean either mind and what's made of mind, the sort of quality, the secondary parts, features of mind that we can identify, or it means it can come from mind, okay? Both of those are possible. But when you use this word chitta chaita together, sometimes in Sanskrit, you can use one word to refer to both. It implies the other. So when you say chitta, and for instance, even in the Chittamatra school that everybody knows, it's chitta chaita. Okay, so there's this quality of using the term like that makes for a big confusion. Is it just being used alone in a specific way, or is it being used together as this broader thing? And when you have the mind together with the mindset, with the features of mind, you have you have a little bit of understanding thrown in with some, maybe some root klesha somewhere here. That's what creates a mindset.
Together is what you're calling the mindset.
You can refer to both of those as mindset, but also because chitta doesn't actually, from my personal understanding, does not really correspond correctly to mind, doesn't correspond correctly to heart. And if you wonder about this, I'll tell you, in German, what they translate that as? Geist. Chitta, translated as Geist. French, anybody? Esprit. Spirit, right? They don't translate that as mind the way we have in this English word, mind. Sounds very heavy. What's in your mind? So that word mind for me is something that actually doesn't help. It's all mind, yes. It's a category of mind. But in terms of what is actually being implied, this word bodhicitta is the main usage of chitta here. We're not talking about chitta in the Abhidharma sense. The sutra itself uses the word chitta in the same way that chitta is in bodhicitta. Every time you see chitta, that's what's going on. Not an abhidharmic discussion. And what is that chitta? It's a chitta or a chaita. And later you have Haribhadra and others debating. Maybe you know about the debates. Is bodhicitta a sem or is it a semjung? Right? That debate comes out of the Indian tradition that sees chitta as chitta chaita. And so the question cannot arise if you put mind there. The question can't arise. Is that wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings? Is that wish the real bodhicitta? Which is a wish would be a semjung. How did the tradition come to have this discussion? Is because that term chitta is in some sense loaded. It's another loaded term, especially bodhicitta. As I say in the foreword to the translation, bodhicitta is kind of it's almost an oxymoron, and so is bodhisattva. So Buddha is not a sentient being. Sentient beings are here, and then you have Buddha or Bodhi, Sattva, and bodhisattvas are somewhere in between, right? They're not sattvas and they're not Buddhas. They're bodhisattvas, right? And the same thing is sentient beings have chittas, and Buddhas don't have chittas the same way, according to this description, okay? There's different discussions about whether it's a chitta or not in different philosophical places. But so you have this bringing together bodhi and chitta. And what's in between is a bodhicitta. Okay, between those two things. And so it's trying to be this middle space term. And when you say mindset of awakening, in Sanskrit, I was telling you there's plays on words, and Sanskrit is an incredibly, incredibly rich language. We could probably, spend hours just talking about examples of how this works. But when you see the commentators talking about these terms, it's just amazing. It's just amazing how they talk about the terms, how they open the terms up. A lot of what we have gotten handed down to us is that there are two types of bodhicitta. There's absolute and relative, and then Saṅgha had the aspiring and then the engaging. Okay, this is what's handed down to us. But in the Sanskrit tradition, it's not so much that you're sort of saying we've told you what this is and now there are two types. They're looking into the meaning of the original term and pulling out two types of meanings. So the question of whether or not it's a primary mind or a secondary mind is baked into that term. That's why that discussion comes. The second thing is that if you want to do plays on words, I'll do one for you. I'll do one in English for you with Mindset of Awakening to show you just kind of what happens in Sanskrit. So at one level, the mindset of awakening, at one level, initially, is just a mind set on awakening. And at the next level, a mindset of awakening is a mind set in awakening. So you're reinterpreting this you say, well, what is mindset in awakening? You're engaged in awakening. A mind that is set in awakening. It's set. It's not even you're doing all the paramitas and you're practicing. You're not thinking, I've got to attain awakening. You're doing it. You're on the path. The first one is conceiving of the goal. The second one is actually carrying it forward. Now, I'm not saying this is the greatest pun on the word. Or we could maybe do it different ways. You might come up with a better version of it. But this is what's going on in Sanskrit. And those terms are not being nailed down the way the Abhidharma tradition wants in this sutra. And they're debating about what is that. And if there is no kind of confusion, and there's first an ontological debate about what that is, which is very familiar to everybody. It's famous tatchittam achittam. That mindset is free of mindset. The mindset of awakening has to be understood here. That mindset of awakening, not the description of what is sem and whether it's real or not. In that context, that's what Shariputra wants to do. He wants it to be the chitta of the Abhidharma. And this term, which he's using, mindset of awakening, which is equivalent to the transcendent state of wisdom. They are equals in some sense in this sutra. This term is the subject of their discussion, the confusion. He wants it to mean something more sort of like primary mind or secondary mind, or what you're saying. He doesn't say it in that way. I'm just saying that that attitude of going back and forth. And when it's used, it's defined very differently than we're used to in the sutra. And what he talks about, and you'll see it in the first chapter almost immediately, is he's talking about the initial mindset of awakening, because then in the Abhisamayalankara, as you may know, they go through 22 different stages and types of the mindset of awakening. Not the 2 that we have, or the 4, 3 plus 4, however you want to divide them. 22 at each stage of a bodhisattva. And that starts at the Shravaka stage. It always starts near to where a Shravaka is and moves all the way up. Each one of those is described differently, and they give metaphors for each in the 22 similes, famous metaphors. I'm going to expose my poor memory if I try to recite them. But they're 22, and they unfold. And so what is the difference at each stage? If it's just a mind of awakening, how is that mind changing? How are you to understand that that is a changing phenomenon? But mindsets, we understand. Mindset is what organizes. It's a complex mental state. A complex mental state that you can say shapes your experience. It shapes your experience. And in fact, later Yogacara authors said this word chitta, which in Sanskrit looks like the word chitta and could be historically related, who knows. It's a little bit of an etymology, again, a creative etymology, but they say chinoti iti chitta. Chinoti means collects. What is the definition of chitta? Chitta, that which they're saying they're assuming it's a past tense. What has accumulated? They're defining chitta as a past participle of collect, accumulated. That's the meaning of chitta. It's creative, okay? We're not saying that's, but they're trying to tell you something with that. What has accumulated karmically? Up to this point, every moment of our chitta is what has accumulated to now. So they're saying that chitta is not a thing. It's not a thing. It's a single thing. It's what has accumulated. Then they distinguish this term from the term manas, which might be translated, I don't know, probably lo or yi in Tibetan. Is it lo, Nate? What is it? Nyun yi. Yeah, so manas, yi. We have the klishta manas, the nyun yi. So it's yi, yeah. So they say manas, for manas, they give a different etymology and different explanation. They say manuteti manas. So manute means thinker. Manas is the thinker. That term they use to refer to the thinker. So mind as thinker, mind as what has accumulated. Mind as vijnana, vijanati iti vijnana. Vijnana is consciousness, used in the 6 consciousnesses, right? The divided consciousness as we understand. So it's mind as consciousness, mind as thinker, mind as mindset. It is mindset. It is inlaid with all that's been accumulated. And that includes chitta chaita. So in each moment, that chitta is the running count of mind. Where is mind at? Its locatedness. So when I translate it as mindset, I know this is a word that is a new word, people have different understandings. You have a small town mindset. What's wrong with you? But it's something that shapes the way you see the world. And actually, this corresponds quite well to the mindset of awakening. When you have that mindset of awakening, you're not thinking, you're not monasing, you're not minuting. You're not thinking about awakening all the time. It is your established perspective, the mindset from which you are approaching your life. And it shapes and colors everything you do from that point forward once you give rise to that. Once that mindset develops, it's rock hard. That's why they say sa, first one. First of the 22 similes. By the way, Ratnakarshana goes through 80. He says 22, that's nothing. There's 80 here. There's 80. And from the Akshayamati Sutra, Nirdesha Sutra. So anyway, please forgive me, I don't mean to be totally insistent that I'm right. But I do have this feeling that if you don't explain, it's very hard to make change. Many people are very attached to perfection of wisdom because they've said it for years. I might slip. Watch me, I might say it. But that term doesn't give us any access to the meaning. How are the different perfections in the swimming metaphor going to apply? And how does it tell us something really important about the comparative nature of what one thinks is a transcendence, but hasn't gone far enough? The furthest state, which turns out to be not far enough. Are you going to say they have perfection and the next one has perfection and the next one? How can they all have perfection of wisdom?
Alex Burson translates it as far-reaching.
Which the
Far-reaching.
translates what though?
Instead of transcendent. You know,
That's usually the
paro duchimpa.
right.
I think the paro,
You can also do transcendent wisdom. Just take out the state if you don't like it. But there's a lot of emphasis in these in using the term regularly. At least you get that transcendent quality. And the less preferential is, from my perspective, and people have different opinions. Please, I'm just sharing my opinions. Transcendent perfection brings both of them together. Okay, you can bring both, but it's a lot of words, a lot of syllables in there. But as far as the transcendent state, if you're going to read and study, one has to sort of come to terms with the fact that they're talking about different states all the time, and they're calling it avastha. And the whole thing is saying we're at this state. As far as mindset, it is my preferred term for mindset of awakening. And in this sutra, as I said, it's using the term in that sense the whole time. It's wherever it occurs. It's not in that abhidharmic sense. And there's this kind of different understandings of that is the center of the whole sutra, in a way. And so I think mindset does a good job. And I also think that it's a very available term for us. We know what a mindset feels like. We get into them all the time. So why not have an awakening mindset, a growth mindset, instead of that small town mindset? I want an awakening mindset. That mindset will treat everything I encounter as a means for awakening or benefiting others. Right? Well, so I don't know. Humbly, I suggest you try and read it and see how it feels. And don't fill my email box with complaints. But I'm more than willing to take correction as it goes. This is, as they say, a work in progress. If you don't know, this is a fun fact. This sutra was translated 7 times into Tibetan by successive translators. And I don't even know, I think there was one, I don't know if it's credited or not, but Taisitu Rinpoche from the 1700s, that late in Tibetan history, retranslated it And I don't know if he was credited for that, but each time it was done by masters, incredible masters. So please forgive my mistakes. I'm not a master, but in the manner that I'm mentioning this is that there's this idea that, oh, we just get our terms, we get them standard. It's been here for 50 some years. Why does he want to change things? All our prayers say perfection. Everything says perfection we've written on. We talk about the 6 perfections. What are we supposed to say? 6 transcendent states? Understood. Understood. Believe me, understood. But if we're going to make inroads, and this is what happens in Tibet, in my opinion, somebody has to be bold enough to make the change, make that change, and do something that we can get used to, that actually accurately reflects what's in the scriptures. And you could say, oh, perfection's close enough. It's kind of a placeholder. If you don't know what perfection of wisdom is, you're never going to know from this scripture anyway. I beg to differ. The words in this scripture, we're told by the scripture itself, these words should be venerated incredibly as being sources of this very state of transcendent state of wisdom. This word, the title word, is not one of those things we just say, let's accept the placeholder. Let's move on. Can't we move on? It's settled. This one is worth fighting for. I'll tell you another crazy one if you want that didn't make this cut. Because I'm willing to give on many other terms. Mindset, no. Transcendent state, no. But I had, instead of bodhisattva, great being, I had magnanimous bodhisattva. This was my preferred translation. We changed it. I brought it in line with other things. Not a big deal. But what I'm saying is that if that doesn't ring well, okay, fine. But for me, saying bodhisattva, great being, is a little bit more than you want in the mouth. And why do you need Donald Trump, the president? Sorry to bring that up again. But when I translate, I give a lot of thought, and everybody does, and everybody can differ. We can all disagree and all do our best to try and improve this. 7 times translated. Go ahead, retranslate me in a generation or tomorrow. Improve it. This is where I got to. And when I saw Mahasattva, I saw in Latin, Maha means magna. Sattva is animus. So magnanimous is actually the Latin translation of Mahasattva. But it happens to mean something in English, which is very connected to the Sanskrit, Mahasattva. When they tell you what is a Mahasattva, they say it's this desire to do the best for beings. So it does capture this magnanimous quality. And how would it be to say all your recitations, the magnanimous bodhisattva instead of the bodhisattva mahasattva? Magnanimous gives you an immediate feeling. That's the way I translated the scripture. I tried my best. Translate the jokes, translate the words. That's the theory of this. It make it very going about life in the transcendent state of wisdom, not coursing in the perfection. So if you don't like the translation sort of theory, magna. What's magna? Oh, MAGA. Yes, Subhuti. I am stuck at this level of pointing out definite meanings to words. Exactly right. Exactly right. Thank you so much. Okay. Sorry. Was there another question or somebody wanted to?
I know.
I think we're over.
I would love to just hear 4 more days of discussing terminology.
Yeah.
But you've also sold me on really reciting the text.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for these comments. I think we look forward to some informal discussions and comments from others as well in the coming days to learn a lot more about this text. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, so next we have some closing prayers,
was
and then I'll make
fun.
a few final comments.
Crazy with my
Oh, you're welcome to. Nobody loves this more than I do.
Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. In the snowy mountain pure land, you're the source of good and happiness. Powerful Tenzing Gyatso Chenrezi, may you stay until samsara ends. May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of those sounds teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. May the deeds of explaining and practicing the Dharma, done by groups supporting the teachings and their upholders, who spread the view of dependent arising and non-violent actions in the 10 directions, and especially at Sravasti Abbey in the West, flourish.
And so for our friends online, we do invite you to come back and do the resounding with us. We will beginning with an opening ceremony and then start reciting the text tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So we hope you can join us then. And on the website, there's the full schedule. You can also see on YouTube the different times that the recitings will be happening over the next 4 days. So thank you very much. And for everyone here, we can stand and invite our teachers to depart.